So our panel today is a very unusual one because it is a unique opportunity to see and hear diverse perspectives on cochlear implant. 14 of the 16 authors who wrote are participating in the panel today. And each of these panelists has had a unique experience with their cochlear implant. Now, this handout that you have here shows 6 different categories of sort of background information, and that is some general information. But within each category, the panelists have had very diverse experiences.
Hello, it's good to be here with all of you today. My name is Marissa Klopper. I am alumni of RIT. I graduated in 2005. Since that time, I have been working as a physician's assistant. While I was at RIT, I came in the summer of 2003. I was 20 years old, and that's when I received my implant in my left ear. I had grown up using 2 hearing aids. Once I got the cochlear implant, I had an advanced bionic implant. That's the name of the company of the implant that I bought. I just got a new processor, and it's called the NTID. I've been having I like it so far because of the new sound software that's in the implant. The reason I received the implant in the first place was that I wanted to improve my speech and my listening skills. And my speech, I found, and my lip reading, mixed with the hearing, truly did improve after my implant, much more than it had with my hearing aids. However, I did notice that there were some limitations that followed as well. There are 2 specifics I'll share with you. First being, when I did have my hearing aids, I feel as though I could hear sounds from a distance. I could discriminate those sounds. But with the cochlear implant that I'm using now, I'm not having that discrimination as easily as I did. Even though things might be right here next to me, I'm not picking up on it as well as I did prior to having the implant. Secondly, because I work as a physician's assistant, I rely heavily on visual equipment. They have a stethoscope, for example, that's visual for someone like myself. So instead of hearing a heartbeat, I'm able to see it.
Through waveforms.
I use it through waveforms, and visually, I'm able to diagnose and to see things that I'm not through my hearing. My cochlear implant is 150 hertz, and some of the heart sounds are lower than that frequency, so I'm not able to discriminate them. I'm missing those sounds. So that's why I prefer to use the visual equipment to aid in my work. So that's a summary quickly of who I am. I'd like to go ahead right now and briefly explain some of the significant experiences that I have had since my implant. Last summer is a good example of this. It was 2013. I was cooking vegetable bars and cutting them up for a friend's get-together. We were having a barbecue at their house. I had just told my mom how many bars I needed to cut to ensure that there would be enough for the correct number of people attending the party. Then 2 or 3 minutes later, my father walked up next to me, and I didn't look to see him. I kept doing what I was doing and my eyes on my work. I heard my father say, "Why are you cutting them so small?" And I didn't even look to respond. I just continued in my work and said, "Well, there's about 30 people coming to the party, so I want to make sure that I have enough for everyone, and I'm making 48. And I continued to cut. When I finished this, I looked up at my dad, and my dad and I looked at each other in shock. We were amazed. He said, "You understood me without even looking." And I remember that very fondly, and that will stay with me, because it was an automatic reflex. It was like a hearing person being able to respond. I didn't have to work at it. I didn't have to figure out what he was saying. I didn't have to put much effort into it. I didn't have to lip read. because that had always been a challenge for me. Also, because it was in context, of course, it helped a lot. So that's my story.
Hello, my name is Sally Atkins. I work in the accounting department here at RIT. I'm going to give a brief background of my experience with my cochlear implant. I got my cochlear implant in 1989, so it's been about 25 years altogether that I've had it. At the beginning, it was a wonderful experience for me, and it has been throughout the time that I've had it. It's helped me to communicate with members of my family as well as coworkers and other friends that don't sign. And even today, I use my cochlear implant for communication, primarily with hearing family and the coworkers here. However, I've noticed that I've been using my cochlear implant fewer times when I'm interacting with deaf and hard of hearing people who sign, and sometimes I'll turn it off at those interactions. And then, there are some times where I just want some peace and quiet at home, and I'll turn it off at those times as well. So that basically is my cochlear implant experience, but I want to talk about what I emphasized in the chapter of the book that I wrote. I wrote about how the cochlear implant can affect parents as they try to figure out what's best for their child, whether they should implant their child or try other techniques with their children. And my concern is that I want to make sure that children know who they are, that they identify themselves as deaf people, that they're not feeling that they're hearing people. I think we need to focus on our children's intellectual development, emotional development, and psychological development as well, and their welfare. It's important that they identify who they are and have an identity that they can feel is their own. Parents want their children to have the abilities to grow as a child. And I would just caution parents who have deaf children who think the cochlear implant will cure their deafness. That is not a cure for all. And cochlear implant is very effective for some, while it's not effective for others. And I just want to make sure parents understand that. It's important that parents only just interact with people in the medical profession, because the medical professionals don't know everything. They have not lived the deaf experience. So I would advise parents to speak with other people who have cochlear implants and get a variety of perspectives from cochlear implant users before they make their decision, so they can figure out what is the best communication tool for their child. Also, it's important that parents attend to speech of their child, and although they have to do that, they need to focus on the whole communication that the child is involved with, not just speech, but the variety of tools that they could utilize to allow their child to communicate. And I spoke a lot about that in the chapter. That was concern for me, that I wanted to make sure that the child's welfare is taken into account, specifically their psychological welfare, when parents implant their children. Thank you very much.
My name is Kelly Kim. I graduated from here, RIT, from the MSSE program. I believe you're all familiar with that. I was graduated from there in 2003. And wow, have things changed now that I'm back to see the difference. I was born deaf. I had an implant when I was 15 years old. And it was my decision, not my parents' decision. My parents were actually against it. My father's a doctor. My mom used to be a nurse. And they were the ones that were against it. So it was my decision to go ahead and have the implant. Again, that happened when I was 15. Then it was hooked up. And at 16... it was just before I became 16, and unfortunately it was not successful for me at all. I could hear absolutely nothing. But I had some basic feelings, internal feelings and vibrations, or things I could sense within my body. And they thought maybe one day this will work for you. I did try a speech processor that also was connected to my implant, and that happened during Thanksgiving break. Yes, Thanksgiving break. The first sound I heard was my father. He was in the sink, and there were plates stacked up in the sink around Thanksgiving time, and he decided to have the last plate on the bottom taken out of the entire stack, which of course then the entire stack fell and made this huge clanging noise. I was working on a Latin project in the next room, and I nearly jumped out of my chair from hearing that. So that was my first introduction to sound. So I went back to the audiologist and tried to get mapping changed a little bit and work on the processor. Then I was able to process a little bit more sound, and it worked a little bit more effectively. I did use my implant for 4 years. I was mainstream throughout my educational life. After that, I went to Gallaudet University. My first year at Gallaudet was a very difficult experience for me because of the implant. I would go into Gallaudet, and of course, you know, the culture there is quite deaf and very, very deaf-friendly and very, very deaf pride culturally. And with the implant, it was not something that worked well in that culture. They didn't see me as a deaf person. They saw me as a person with a cochlear implant. I was picked on. They talked about me. They made fun of me in the cafeteria. I was the hot topic of conversation, which was not something I was interested in continuing. It was very difficult. So at that point, I decided to stop using the implant. After the 4 years there, after 4 years of using it, I had decided to stop. And it wasn't necessarily because of the deaf culture, but you know, hearing people have a filtering system that they use to block out noises. They call it white noises, background noises. When you're born and raised and grown up in a hearing culture as a hearing person, you have the ability to discriminate and attend to whatever sound you choose to pick up on. Unfortunately, I didn't have that ability. I could hear people, I could hear me brushing my hair, I could hear paper, I could hear a vacuum, I could hear running water, which sounds like a good idea, but it's crazy, it's too hard, it's too much. And at Gallaudet, they scream. People scream at the top of their lungs in deaf culture. And I'd say, I hear that. So after a while, and again, not because of that particular experience, but I didn't have the ability to discriminate what I could hear and what I didn't. So that was enough of that for me. As time went by, I graduated from Gallaudet University and then went to RIT, and I was here in Rochester for 5 years, and I did not use my implant during that time. I got a teaching job in Georgia, and then I began teaching ASL at DC, Virginia, Maryland area. And again, I did not use my implant during that time. Then I moved to Massachusetts. I got a job in Massachusetts, teaching again, full-time teaching job, teaching ASL, and again, no implant. So I guess my point is, in the chapter in the book that I wrote, says, and what I'm trying to tell people is that with an implant, without an implant, you can do whatever you want. It works for everyone in their own way. So an interesting point I would like to bring up, though. In the chapter, I do remember telling a story, and I do not regret my decision at all to get the cochlear implant. But some people think, well, you stopped using it. Why did you stop using it? Some people say it's awesome. Some people say, was it a bad experience? It wasn't a bad experience. I don't see it that way. I see that it was a good experience for me, even though I don't continue to use it today. I think the experience of the cochlear implant taught me things, and I learned things that I wouldn't have otherwise known or had the opportunity to be exposed to. And I learned what was important for me and what I needed. So through my own identity, I was able to change and incorporate what I needed as a deaf person. I still have the implant inside my head, of course, but when I tell people that I used to have a cochlear implant, they'd say, why do you stop using it? And I tell the story of why I decided not to use it. And again, I'd like to emphasize, even though I'm not using it, it's a very positive experience for me. And that experience I keep with me, and I don't think of it in a negative way. So right now, I'm very happy. And I sign, obviously. I have a positive relationship with my family. And I get along with my hearing peers at my job with no problems. So to me, whether you have it or it doesn't, your life is going to be terrific one way or the other. So thank you for your attention.
Hi, everyone. I'm Julianne Bonta, and I got my implant in 2001, and I had forgotten that fact because it feels like I got it 5 years ago. No. But let me just briefly tell you, I became profoundly deaf when I was 1 year old. At that point, my parents sent me to the Indiana School for the Deaf for 1 year when I was 5. That was both a horrible experience and a wonderful experience. My teacher was great, and it turns out she became the superintendent later. Great. From that point, I was mainstreamed in regular schools, and I basically sweet-talked all my teachers into letting me study on my own, and that worked. Plus, my family loves to read. I still do. Anyway, I use my implant now in certain situations. I have it on now. When I'm with hearing people, I use it. When I'm with my family, I use it. Unless they're being problematic, then I turn it off. When I'm at home, it's off unless I'm listening to music, which I love. I am an editor and a writer, and now a new website builder, new technology. I have my own business, and I love that. And one of the reasons the implant has become more important to me, as I talk about in my chapter in the book, the title is Here Be Dragons. I talk about seeing the world as territory, hearing territory, deaf territory, hard of hearing territory. For me, having the implant has expanded my access to all three of those things. And it's not perfect, can't be, but it's access in ways that I resisted for many years. I finally decided to get the implant because of that word, assets. At first, I thought it would mean giving up deaf identity. Baloney. My deaf identity is stronger now than it's ever been. And so for me, I see the implant as a tool. Signing is a tool. And because I look at those things and the implant as a tool, they are wonderful things to be used. They can be abused. But for me, it's been mostly a cool experience. My only real negative in relation to the implant has been that music doesn't sound the same as it did with a hearing aid. But that was 10, 12 years ago, and I just realized today I need to go back to my audiologist and get remapped. Because I will bet you they've got better programming now. So, my responsibility. Probably the most significant experience recently I've had is I'm trying a new thing called the Jam Box. Have any of you heard of that? It's an wrong concept. Might sound amplifier, about this big. And with that, hooked into it, I can understand my dad purely voice only with that. Holy, you know, crap. Whoa. For me, even now, it's still an alien experience to understand sound without visual relations. My brain is searching for the visual correlation to sound always, even today. But I'm 56 years old. That's probably normal. I still don't regret getting it, and in fact, now I'm thinking about getting a second implant. But it will be with a different company because I've done my research this time. I didn't research enough the first time. My fault, my responsibility. Well, now I'm prepared. And it's important to research because all of the electrode lengths are not the same from company to company. And if an electrode goes deeper, you get more of the bass or bass. You hearing people who want to correct my speech, you know what I'm talking about. Sounds. So I think I may get a second implant, but I will be honest and admit that if I had no way to turn the implant off, I wouldn't have gotten it. Because for me, the important key here is options. I have the option for silence, which I love dearly and always will. I have the option for sound, which I also love dearly in certain situations. So I think I live in the best of all worlds, all three of those worlds. And I'm thrilled to see so many more people getting that technology. And the last thing I want to say is, you give up nothing by getting an implant. You add something, and you have options. And that's important to state only because many times people think that getting an implant means you give up your deaf identity. That's wrong. You can give it up. I refuse to do that. I'm empowered in all three of those worlds because of that. So, thank you for listening.
I want to go back about 9 years ago. And then I sat down with my colleague, Mark, and I talked about the importance. There was so much diversity in the results of implants that we needed to allow people to tell their stories. That's what you see happening in the book and today. So I want to take a minute to thank all of them, because at the time I asked them 8 or 9 years ago, it was a little bit dangerous to open yourselves, even in this community. Compared with now, we have almost 400 students with CIs. Almost like a nose ring. Very expensive nose ring. Very expensive. Students themselves are cool about it. They're comfortable with technology. Now, really, the experts are here today in the audience. Many of my colleagues, I look out recently, 2 years, 3 years ago, one family, a whole family, have had implants. You bring the next generation of experience. The panel already asked me this morning, they asked Mike because he's retiring, you have plenty of time to do a second edition? Because it's time. There are new stories, new results. We still want people to make informed decisions. It's a personal choice. Look at the title of my chapter, To a Place Where I Belong. If you don't know that, 70s music, SVP 74, okay? Famous song. A singer would say, to the West Virginia country road, to the place where I belong. For me, born hard of hearing, hearing aids anymore. Wanted some communication with people that didn't sign, including my mother and father, who were old. It was a time for me to change roles and help them as they near dying. So the implant enabled me to do that very successfully. It's also a time for me to take advantage. I have a son. Many of you met my son, Tim. Jenny has an implant too, and her results are different than mine. But Tim was a singer, expert singer. I wanted to see if I could benefit from hearing when he graduated from high school, because it was all state New York. So it was a personal choice. I want to applaud this community, NTID, because we tend to be very strong supporting choice, allowing deaf people to choose. This community is very respectful, and we're committed to continuing that respect for diverse choices. And I also want to thank both Mark for encouraging the idea and Mike, because he picked up the ball and finished it, really made it happen. And thank the RIT Press. And I hope some of you who are sitting in the audience who have more recent experience will consider writing for the second edition. Thank you.
I'm very happy to be here. I see many of my friends here. I worked here for about 30 years. I arrived here in 1968. Sitting on the panel, it's made me think. The title of my chapter is The Sound of Water. I took that from Helen Keller, as you may know, but it was different. She could see and feel water for the first time in a long time. I could hear water. And I always remembered the water. I could think of water flowing, but I could never hear it. So that's why I entitled my chapter what I did. I wanted people to understand where I'm coming from before I use up my 5 minutes. I became deaf when I was 6 or 7, and I became profoundly deaf. I had no hearing. I was in a coma, and I woke up, and I just automatically speech read the doctor. He asked me how I felt, and I told him I was fine. But he didn't realize I was deaf. And it was not until I got home, when I went out to play with my friends, I went out into the street and I got hit by a car because I didn't hear the car coming. And suddenly, my entire world changed. My parents had very high expectations for me because I was the first boy born into a Jewish family of 5 girls. And that really made a big difference. It was on my shoulders to become the doctor or the lawyer. But with my deafness, I became something completely different. My grandfather told me I was broken. I had to go to a school for the deaf. And the experience there was very different. I went into a one-room classroom in Albany, New York, and I was there for a year, and then I moved to the Rochester School for the Deaf. That was about the 1940s. Now, when I look at Julianne, maybe she had a similar experience to me. I will tell you that every morning, when you're in school, we had to line up, and they gave us a tablespoon of castor oil. Some of you maybe don't even know what castor oil is, but let me tell you, it was horrible because they wanted our speech to be perfect. And the method they used at the Rochester School for the Deaf was all finger spelling. After 1 year there, I went to Public School 47 in New York City. I graduated from there, and for the rest of my educational career, I was mainstreamed. I was really unistreamed. I was the only deaf person in our high school. I wore hearing aids briefly. I had a body aid and battery packs that you had to wear on your chest and your belt, which I hated, and after a year I stopped using them because they weren't helpful to me at all. And I didn't use anything to assist my hearing until I got my cochlear implant. I just used my residual hearing, and I was very good at speech reading. I was able to get through college with some support, minimal support, but that was very late. There was really nothing to help me. My first bachelor's degree and my first associate's degree, I got through on my own. I always sat next to someone, and I asked a friend to take notes for me. And I would look at the chapters in the book, and I would see specific words, and I would ask them about them, and they would say, I would think, never mind, that's not important. And I would ask the person to me, what's the teacher saying? And the student would say, never mind, that's not important. And I would think, If this is not important and the textbook is not important, why am I here? Somehow I got through school one way or another. I got my associates, my bachelor's, my master's, and eventually my doctorate. And then 11 years ago, I decided that I wanted to hear the voices of my children and my grandchildren. My wife and I made a decision that I would get my cochlear implant, and I didn't have high expectations. I wanted to be able to hear their voices. I wanted to be able to hear the environmental sounds around me. And I wanted to help my wife out when she called me from another room so she wouldn't have to get up and always come and find me. And I also wanted to hear music. I do enjoy music. When I went in for the testing, I had to write an essay of why I wanted a cochlear implant. And again, I did not have high hopes or high expectations. I listed out for them what I wanted, and they approved it, and I got my first CI in 2003. Since then, my life has changed in some ways and not in other ways. I'm still a deaf person. That has not changed and will not change. The CI has helped me in many ways. I do many things today that I wasn't able to do before. I enjoy many things that I couldn't enjoy before. I can hear things. I can remember the first time I heard water running, and it was a surprise. I can remember hearing the telephone ringing. Again, a surprise. I didn't know what that sign was, the sound was. And then I was surprised to find out that the windshield wipers squeaked when they worked in the car. I never knew that they made a sound. And then I turned my turn signal on, and there was a blinker sound, and I couldn't figure out where these sounds were coming from. So the discovery of sounds has been wonderful. I will tell you, as others have said, and the question they've basically posed the audience, is the CI right for everyone? It's not right for everyone, and it won't change you to become a hearing person. It will enhance you in some ways and enhance you in other ways. And a question I asked for myself, would I want to change myself over? No. I do become tired at the end of the day because of the sound, and there are opportunities for me to take it off, because I still need that silent time that I've grown accustomed to. Thank you all for coming this afternoon, and thank you for listening. I appreciate your attention.
I'm Kim Poutre, and I had a cochlear implant in 2006, and had it removed in 2009. Since the writing of the book for New Beginnings, it was a lot has happened since then. Having it removed was the best thing for me. While I was wearing the implant, I had a lot of episodes of collapsing, passing out, and seizure-like episodes. From the very beginning of having the implant put in, it was a back and forth experience of being kind of good because I could hear things with the implant, but the implant was doing a lot of bizarre things to me, creating a lot of problems like sensitivity to fluorescent lights, white lights especially. Certain sounds would make me collapse. The combination of sound and lights, the movement of what I was seeing would make me feel really awkward. I couldn't go anywhere for 3 years. It was a 3-year nightmare for me. I had the implant put in Rochester, and I got out of the Rochester area and went to Boston to have it removed. Since then, when I went to Boston and had it removed, they were actually amazed of the difference from when I had the implant in and couldn't function. I couldn't do anything. I had to have somebody with me all the time while I had the implant in. I could not be left alone at all. because of the possibility of having any kind of a seizure-like sort of episode. The reason why I say seizure-like is because they don't feel that it was an actual seizure, but they felt that it was similar to a seizure. During the 3 years of not being able to do anything and being basically isolated at home and trying to figure out, okay, well, the implant's not working, I can't hear anything, what am I gonna do? And so gradually, I was trying to find some type of solution. I didn't know sign language, so that made it difficult. I was trying to learn sign language, and I couldn't. Sign language is a very difficult thing for me for whatever reason. I know some of the basics, and I can understand some of it, and I can do a little bit, but not a lot. So I'm sorry about that, for those that do sign. So after having it removed, I slowly started to gain my hearing back. We don't know why. It's actually a mystery. Currently, I'm wearing a hearing aid in my left ear that helps me hear, and back to being actually hard of hearing. I don't hear very much out of my right ear that was implanted, and but I do have some residual hearing in the implanted ear. I started wearing the hearing aid after the implant was removed. I started wearing the hearing aid and gradually, slowly was able to tolerate sounds again. Now I'm at the point that after I had it removed, sorry, I'm backing up a little bit. After having it removed, 6 months post-op from the surgery, I was actually in a car accident. So I was still recovering from having the CI removed and was in a car accident. And then I had to go for treatment for my neck because I had a double spinal fusion from the accident. And I had acupuncture treatments. The acupuncture treatments actually helped my hearing. I had acupuncture when I was 10, which helped my nerve deafness and actually did work. And then I forgot about it. I forgot completely about having the acupuncture when I was 10 years old. And after having treatment for my neck, people noticed, my family members have noticed, you're responding. What's going on? How come you're responding to us? I said, I don't know, it's kind of odd. Then I realized that it must have been the acupuncture because I was having the needles by my ear and on the tip of my head. And today, I can listen to the radio again. I'm able to hear out of my left ear using the hearing aid and feeling more stable. I don't feel off balance anymore. Although I don't have the implant in my right ear, I feel balanced, I don't feel awkward. Usually when you listen to a radio, it's something that it's like a one-sided speaker. I don't have that anymore. I do feel, sometimes I can't tell if somebody's on my right side or where the sound is actually sort of coming from, if they're behind me. But I don't feel off balance, I don't feel like lopsided or anything because of having it removed. So I'm doing very well. I'm trying to get my life back after losing 3 years of it. Would I have the implant put in again and try again? Absolutely not. I would not do it. But it's been a good experience for some people, and it's been a bad experience for others. And it's a very personal choice to decide to have the implant in or have it removed. And for me, I would not do it again. Boston wants to try. Boston wants to try to put it in and put another one in and see if it would actually help. But after losing 3 years, no, absolutely not. I'm happy to have my life back after that bad experience. So, thank you.
I received my cochlear implant 13 years ago, and I still use it. And I'm a professor here at NTID, and mostly I do educational research. So I'm going to discuss the second question. What has been your most significant experience since you received your cochlear implant? Or since you wrote your chapter? Okay, I'm going to share an experience I had last month with my son when my son and I went to a Syracuse basketball game. Now, my son and I have a tradition of going to a Syracuse basketball game every winter. And I have to tell you that the noise in the Carrier Dome where Syracuse plays its basketball games is really loud. In fact, it is so loud that a hearing person would call it deafeningly loud. I've had the same difficulties hearing in background noise as most people who have a cochlear implant. And when I had a hearing aid, I had even more difficulty hearing in background noise. For 30 years, my son and I have been going to Syracuse basketball games, and I've never heard anything that my son would say to me during the game. But last month, when I went to the game, I heard him. In fact, it was easy for me to hear him and to understand him. This made the event much more enjoyable for me. I was really excited about it. In fact, I was just as excited about hearing my son as about the basketball game that was close and tense. How did I do it? Two things. First, the technician here at NTID suggested that I try using a Samsung remote wireless microphone. Let me show it to you. Get it out. This is the pickup, and this is the receiver. So I connect the microphone here to this cord that is the connection to my cochlear implant for hearing with assistive listening devices. And I'm not a rock star. This kind of a microphone is used mostly by actors and singers on the stage, but it zooms in on the person's voice and it cuts out a lot of the background noise. The other development is that an audiologist here, there she is, Catherine Clark, told me that there was a new sound processing software for my advanced bionic cochlear implant called Hear Clear, right? Clear voice, okay. So that device, that program helped reduce a lot of that loud background noise that I would be hearing in the Carrier Dome. Now, why am I telling you about this basketball game experience? Why was it so important to me? It was important because it has represented a major step in being able to hear in background noise situations. Until now, all my life, when I would go to a sporting event, when I would go to a restaurant, when I would go to a party or something, and there was that loud background noise, I really struggled to understand what people said to me. Now, I know sign, and when I'm with a person who is fluent in sign, of course, the background noise doesn't matter. But often, I'm with people who are not fluent signers. And with my new microphone and the cochlear implant software, they really help me understand those people. So this is an example of how hearing with my cochlear implant is better than it ever was with a hearing aid.
My name is Patty Lego Avery, and I am retired from NTID. I worked here for 25 years as a counselor, helping students with personal and career concerns. I left my career in the year 2000, and since leaving my career here, I've been involved with deafblind issues. I have Usher syndrome type 2A. So my focus after I left here was on publishing. I wrote several chapters for different books, presenting nationally and internationally on deafblind issues, and serving on various committees. I think what I would like to talk about with you is not specific details related to my chapter, but I would like you to understand that my chapter is written from a perspective of an individual who was born with considerable amount of hearing and vision, and by the time I was 40, I was profoundly deaf and legally blind. So when I had my cochlear implant, the first one was in 2002 in my right ear, and my second one was in 2005. I was the first person in the Rochester community to be approved by my insurance company to be a bilateral CI person. And the reason for this was because I was losing my vision. I currently have pretty good central vision, which I'm very fortunate for, but I have no peripheral vision. With my cochlear implants, I've gone from absolutely hearing nothing, that means no discrimination ability, to being able to understand 100% in quiet places. Michael was speaking about noisy places, and of course, I am not as affected by background noise as much as some other people are. But yes, my hearing does go down to about 80% when I'm in restaurants or the mall or in a group setting. I do not use any special technology other than my cochlear implant. I just switched from my everyday program to a noise program. So that's a little bit about my background. And I will want to point out a couple of things about my chapter. My chapter in the book, for those of you who have not read it, is written more from an emotional perspective, which came as quite a surprise to me. I was not expecting to be really emotional about these cochlear implants because I pretty much accepted my deafness. Dealing with shrinking vision was much harder for me than dealing with shrinking hearing. So I kept a journal, and in my chapter, I think a lot of emotion, you'll be reading about a lot of emotional response. I kind of stayed away from the technical stuff. I let Michael deal with all the technical information because he's so good at that. He writes from a researcher's perspective. The most important thing about my chapter also is it's about reconnecting with my parents, who are very elderly now, 91 and 93. Reconnecting with my hearing friends in Michigan, where I grew up, and reconnecting with music, reconnecting with my soul. And I don't want you to think that I was a sad person because I got so emotional in my book, in my chapter, because I was basically a happy person, and I still think that I am. So I guess that's all I really want to say about my chapter, and I hope that you will read the whole book. It's so interesting. And every chapter is different, and it brings so many different perspectives into the whole story of people getting cochlear implants. Thank you very much.
So, as mentioned, I was a professor here about 10 years ago. And the title of my chapter is From Sound to Silence to Sound. If I write it today, it would be from sound to silence to sound to surround sound. So I now have 2 cochlear implants, so bilateral. And that title comes from growing up being hard of hearing, but functioning very much in a hearing world. And then very slowly losing my hearing and being completely deaf by about age 25 or so. I didn't receive my implant until I was about 35, 38 actually. So I had a long period where I functioned as a deaf person. And then I received my cochlear implants and went back to being more hard of hearing, I guess would be the way to phrase it. A lot changed during that time. I love my implant, very happy with it. But my life was very good when I was a deaf person as well. So when I was deaf, I was a father, a husband, a professor here. I had wonderful, understanding colleagues, part of a great community. Now I'm part of a much more hearing-oriented world. So at Oregon State University, still a husband, still a father, still love being a professor. In terms of what's changed, I would say 2 things since the chapter, being bilateral now, so sound on both sides. And as some people have mentioned, both the hardware and the software keeps improving, and it's amazing. So a quick story to illustrate. When I was flying recently, I just received brand new processors and new sound, not the clear voice, but similar to what Mike mentioned, that cuts out a lot of the background noise and zeroes in on the speech. But what I noticed is I was getting really agitated because I could hear the couple behind me. And they weren't really a couple, it was a young man trying to impress a woman next to him. And I was hearing every word of this for about an hour, so finally put headphones on and listened to music. So clarity is usually good, but not always. But it amazes me now, the things that I can hear. Like most people here, I can recall that first moment near here. I was at Dunkin' Donuts, I ordered coffee, I got the coffee, and the woman said, "Have a nice day." And I realized that I actually heard her say that and responded to it. And that was the first moment I really heard someone without speech reading after about a decade or more of not being able to do that. Recently, I skied in Colorado and was there with a friend of mine, and he reminded me the first phone call that we had. He was down in the crawl space of his house fixing something, and his wife told him that I was on the phone, and he said, "What? How could David be on the phone?" But we had a chance to talk on the phone, and now it's just habitual for me. So in fact, I need to put my phone away when I drive so that I don't use my phone too much. So in brief, it's been a very life-changing experience for me in terms of reconnecting with the hearing world that I grew up in. But I also try to emphasize I was very happy before the implant, and I'm very happy now. Just different experiences, both wonderful. Thank you.
Good morning again. My name is Tom Bird. I've been married to my wonderful wife and cochlear implant helper, Mary Ellen, for 42 years. I was a financial service representative with a large insurance company for 35 years. I retired 5 years ago and continued to work part-time in the same position. I received my cochlear implant for my right ear in 2002. I was considered to be a late deafened adult. My hearing loss started at age 4 or 5 because of a bad case of measles. Over the years, the use of hearing aids, listening devices, and then cochlear implants have been used to improve my hearing and communication skills. I did not start wearing a hearing aid until age 29. I received my first cochlear implant at age 58 because of autoimmune inner ear disease. I very much enjoy wearing my cochlear implant. I have it on all day, every day. I consider the cochlear implant to be a life-changing event for myself. My most significant experience with the cochlear implant was when I received my second one, which was for my left ear. In 2006, an audiologist at Washington University in St. Louis was doing a study on using the cochlear implant along with the hearing aid in the non-implanted ear. The study was to see if the combination of a cochlear implant and hearing aid would give us better speech understanding and recognition of where the sound was coming from. After participating in this study, I decided to pursue a cochlear implant for my left ear. My reason for getting a second cochlear implant was twofold. My hearing in the left ear had deteriorated to the same level as my right ear was in 2002. The other reason was that I was 63 and I wanted to see if the CI would be approved by my insurance company before I would be going on Medicare in another 2 years. Medicare would only pay for one cochlear implant, and I did not want to take the chance of not being able to receive one later. The improvement in my hearing with 2 CIs was quite dramatic. My test score in the booth was very similar for both ears, but there was quite an improvement in the score when using 2 CIs together. It is also a little easier to determine the sound direction. Thank you.
Hi, good morning. I'm Erin. This is my husband, Matthew. We started our chapter and we said it was a little bit of everything, and that kind of sums up our family. We have 4 children. This year we are even. We are 12, 14, 16, and 18. And in our family, we have boys and we have girls, and we have deaf and we have hearing, and we have blondes and we have brunettes, and we have tall and we have skinny, and we truly do, we've gotten our money's worth out of our parenting situation. We've tried mainstream schools, we've been in Catholic schools, we've been in schools for the deaf, we've even done some homeschooling. We've had hospitals in state, we've had hospitals out of state, and we've done lots of different therapies and methodologies and interests like that. So we truly do have a little bit of everything, and it has really worked. Our third child is Ethan. He's the one in the book. And he was implanted when he was 1 year old. He was the first baby that was ever implanted in our part of Pennsylvania. The law had just changed, that they approved it for 12 months old, and he was 13 months old. And when he was implanted, we were actually followed by a TV camera, and that cured us of ever wanting to do reality TV, because it's not nice to see all of that on screen. Yeah. He received a second implant when he was 7, so he is bilaterally implanted. And amazingly, Ethan's story is based on, he was born profoundly deaf, and his story is based on his sister, who's our firstborn, Rachel, who was also born profoundly deaf but is not implanted. She wears bilateral aids. And so what we had learned with the battle with Rachel, she's doing miraculous things, we learned that okay was not good enough for us, and we wanted the best. And we had spent 4 years fighting for the best for Rachel before Ethan was born. And so when he was started out in this process, we knew that was the standard that we wanted, and that for him, the cochlear implant was the best, but for Rachel, it wasn't. Unfortunately for Ethan, he was given faulty external equipment, and we did fight for 2 years to get new external equipment. So he really didn't receive consistent sound till he was almost 3. But our problem for many years was that both of our children wanted to sleep. Rachel wanted to sleep with her hearing aids. She wouldn't take them off. Ethan would not take his implants off. He wanted to sleep with his implants. You need to get them in the dry kit. You need to switch batteries. So we had quite an interesting situation with that. And when people 10 years ago, we wrote this 10 years ago, when people asked, did it work? How is it now? And I just thought of this week. Ethan's in a mainstream school. He's been teaching some sign. Both of our kids are completely bilingual and teaching sign to his students. And he wrote a 15-minute presentation and stood in front of the principal of his hearing school and gave a presentation on why he should be allowed to chaperone a field trip for a social studies class to go to the school for the deaf. And then he went into a bowling team, and he went bowling with his best friend, and then he's in charge of the lights for the middle school musical. And so, yeah, it's working. And Rachel's a senior. She's dual enrolled at a college while she's still taking classes in her high school, and she's the manager of the band, and she's a National Honor Society, so a little bit of everything has truly worked for us.
It has, and I think for our two kids, and it was mentioned earlier about the different circles, hearing, hard of hearing, and deaf. I think that speaks for Ethan and Rachel, that whatever circle they find themselves in, they're very comfortable. Communication flows very easily. As a matter of fact, folks who know sign language want to sign to Rachel and Ethan, want to communicate through that. The person might be hearing, and the kids know if you're hearing, you don't know sign language, or if you're hearing, I'm going to speak to you. And sometimes the hearing folk get upset because I want to sign to you, but my kids know, well, you can speak, so we'll speak to you. But if they're in a situation where they need to sign, they'll do that. We were going to a birthday party, and Rachel, Ethan, all 4 kids were running into the room to join the party, except the party was for a deaf friend of ours. And so you see all of them run in, and then my hearing kids kind of come out, and they're a little nervous, and kind of unsure, but Ethan and Rachel right in the mix. So whatever situation they find themselves in, very comfortable, and communication flows very naturally. And I think that's one of the successes out of our experience, whether the hearing or the cochlear. It's just those opportunities and doors continue to open, and they just have options.
The point that we would bring out, we put in the chapter, is that you have a lot of choices, and the choices are not forever. I think some of the parents, when they think of these, they're like, this is what I'm going to have to do forever. I have one shot at this. And no, every year with all of our kids, hearing or deaf, we reevaluate where are they in school, where are they with activities, where are they in their development, emotionally, cognitively, all of those things. If it's not working, then change. Don't stay. Push the envelope. If it is working, then build it up. Make it work harder and faster for your kids. So a lot of these decisions, they're not permanent. If you want sound, that is a crucial thing. You need to get sound as early as possible. But everything else, schools you choose, doctors you choose, therapies you choose, it's not forever. And we encourage parents to know that they can change and try a little bit of everything.
And the hope, too, out of our chapter, as you read that, our hope is for parents, for students, for anyone, that the obstacles that we encountered, the successes that we encountered, with any luck, wherever you're going, get you closer to your goal faster.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello. I have a daughter who's 13. She is not on Honor Society. She's not doing half the things those kids are doing. But I love her dearly. She tries. So Isabella is my daughter. She's 13 years old. And she received her cochlear implant when she was 2.5. She was born profoundly deaf. We tried every hearing aid out there because I really didn't want to go the avenue of the cochlear implant because I felt it was very invasive. She was a baby still. But we felt that it came to a point in our lives where we had to face the realization that we are a hearing family. And that Isabella is my deaf child. So we're learning sign, but we also want her to meet us halfway and maybe learn some speech. So we get her implanted. The surgery was horrendous. It's not like they show you on the video. My daughter didn't come out all smiles with the wrap on her head. It wasn't like that. It was horrendous. So let's see. So right now, she only uses her CI for speech class at Rochester School for the Deaf and to listen to music. She stopped using her cochlear implant when she developed a blood clot over the magnet part in her head. She had to have that removed, the blood clot. It left a scar tissue. And since that time, it's been about 2 years now, she has not been comfortable with wearing the cochlear implant. I think she has become mistrustful of it, that it only causes her pain. And she, unlike their children, when she is in a situation that revolves around a lot of hearing people, a lot of hearing children, she will isolate. She is in a stage of her life right now where she sees hearing people as the bad guy. We try to talk to her about this, that not all hearing people think you're deaf and dumb. That's what they all think we're deaf and dumb. I have to also look at the environment she's in. We chose to put her into Rochester School for the Deaf for socialization reasons. She was mainstreamed. Academically, they bent over backwards for her. It was wonderful, but my 7-year-old child was eating lunch alone with her interpreter. Pittsford schools couldn't come up with any really substantial interactions that were taking place between her and other children. They were using things like, well, she passed one child a pencil. And from there, it was just that my child needs to go to Rochester School for the Deaf. Unfortunately, a lot of us have heard of the trade-off theory. You trade off the academics for the socialization. That is very true. RSD probably gets very annoyed with me, but I have to constantly be on them. What's going on here? Is she failing? Is she not failing? Is she passing? One thing I wanted to bring up from the book chapter quickly is that I feel like when a hearing person family has a deaf child, you have two sides here. You have the hearing side, you have the deaf side, and they both want that child. They want that child. They want that child to be in the hearing side, to have a cochlear implant, to be talking, and the deaf people want them to be part of the deaf culture, the big D, which my daughter very much is right now. But as a parent, it's just overwhelming. And I think my book, or my chapter, really kind of explain that pull you feel, like, which way do I go? Who am I trying to impress? What should I do? Are they giving me good information, or are they giving me information that's only going to benefit them? The same thing, we were in Buffalo Hearing and Speech, and the speech pathologist was adamant with me that Isabella was not going to pass kindergarten because we used sign language with her, even though she had a cochlear implant. Isabella did not respond at all to that cochlear implant for at least 3 months, and hated it. So we had about 5 years. It was a good run with the cochlear implant, but she is very much into deaf culture and deaf community, and I'm very proud of her for that, actually, because she will speak out. She will advocate for herself, and the implant comes off, and she covers her ears, covers her mouth, and she does this dance. And but I'm so proud of her, but in the same respect, I also have to be careful to make sure that she's not living in this deaf culture that is a nice group to be a part of some of the time, but is deaf culture going to help you get a job, get into college, and all these things? Now, this is where my changing has shifted from when I was in MSSE and had her and surrounded in deaf culture, to now what I feel, and some people might get mad, but is a more realistic view of, there are a ton more hearing people than deaf people. You're going to have to compete. Use your implant. It'll help you. But right now she's just at a stage where she's refusing. And so we just try to support her the best we can with what she feels comfortable with now. So I guess I just want to say I wish the two sides would work together more to help families who have these deaf children, and so it doesn't become a tug of war, like, come this way and get your child implanted and don't use sign, or come this way and only use sign. I just wish everyone would come together for that parent, for that family, for that child, and just get over this deaf hearing stuff that goes on. Thank you.
I teach ASL to hearing students, and I'm trying to be neutral because I don't have any experience with an implant like you do. I'm a little confused about some of the things that I've heard today. People talk about being deaf and deaf pride, but what do you want to listen for then if you want to be a deaf person? I mean, I kind of understand that there's identity issues. Hearing people want to hear music, but I don't understand why a deaf person would want to hear. I guess I just don't understand that part. And I know it's very individual and everybody has their own experience, but that's something that I found a little tricky for me to understand is how do you propose explaining a deaf identity and people saying, I'm very proud of being deaf, but then why are you trying to hear? Because isn't that a definition of being deaf?
When I was growing up, I always felt that I was right in the middle. I was right in between the hearing world and the deaf world. The hearing people would tell me I was deaf, and when I interacted with deaf people, they would tell me, oh no, you speak too well. You don't belong with us. So I grew up in the middle, and many people are like that. Now I'm older and I'm grown up and I'm comfortable with who I am as an individual. I'm comfortable with what I have in both of those worlds. As a deaf person, I'm proud of what I've achieved as a deaf individual without any help or support. But also I enjoy things. Why should I be left out of music? Why should I be left out of hearing the sounds around me in my environment? I would miss them if I didn't have the cochlear implant. So today I don't feel that pull of being in the middle. I feel that I can go into either world. I have many opportunities and things today that I didn't have before. So the question doesn't really apply to many. It really is an individual thing. It's not a one answer for everyone.
ASL instructor. Not only do I teach that, but I also teach at the Learning Center in Massachusetts. But I also teach college-level ASL courses. So I teach hearing students predominantly in those situations. And often people say, what does a cochlear implant look like? What does it do? What is the purpose of it? So I encourage them to learn about that so they get information. We have DVDs about cochlear implants that I've shown them. I think there's one that follows Deaf Life. There's one that people talks about Deaf Life with people who have been exposed to a cochlear implant, people who still are very deaf and are using their cochlear implant. We write papers about it. So a lot of people want to know what the controversy is about. So we try and explore that in my classes. So I like to give them not only some professional experiences and some documented experience, but I share my own personal experience with them as well. And everybody's got their own opinion, and everybody's got their own beliefs. You know, you can't force your beliefs on someone else. You just can't. And that's not what a teacher should do. I think we need to give people resources, opportunities to explore things on their own, let them learn things and make their own decisions, or at least that's the way I do it in my class.
I've got a cochlear implant, and I also have the world I live in without one. My Lord, that's crazy good. Now, I identify as a deaf person because my total life experience in terms of receiving communication is predominantly visual, and it always will be until I am dead and cremated and wherever I am after that. But the important thing is, it really is a personal choice. I think it's crazy when people try to take away a person's right to identify however they want to identify. And every human being is complex. Everybody. Hearing people, deaf people, in between people, whatever. So I don't see a contradiction in having deaf identity and having a cochlear implant because it's just a cool option. It's a cool option to hear my kitty purring, which is the bestest sound in the universe to me.
When I arrived at NTID, I had only known sign language for about a year and a half, which I learned in graduate school at the age of 25. When I arrived here, I was told I was hearing. Do you know what that sign means? Okay, kind of an insulting sign, hearing. Then I was told that I was hard of hearing. And then I was told that I was hearing impaired. And then I was told that I was hearing impaired and visually impaired. And then I was told that I was, oh, well, I'm not sure what you are anymore. Maybe you're deaf. You're deaf and visually impaired now. And then you're deafblind. If I had not already had a very strong identity of who I was, and who I was Patty. That was the core of who I was. So I didn't listen to all those labels that people wanted to put on me. They didn't mean anything. Yes, I am deafblind. Yes, I am Patty. But the most important thing about me is that I'm Patty. And the deafblindness is important about me also, but it's not the core of who I am. And that's kind of how I explain my identity. I don't know if that makes any sense to the person who asked the question, but that's how it is for me.
To answer, because I think that, you know, we have a lot of things, all of us have a lot of things that we're trying to do, that we want to do, and so forth. So we want to take time to get together with fellow cochlear implant people to have a special discussion about that. Honestly, I don't know. I don't really have an answer for that. But what I do think is it's really, really important to have resources and information that we can get. And I don't think it's all that easy because the technology and everything keeps changing. I think hearing different people's perspective is really great too, because I think the one point I think this panel has made to you is each one of us is really different, but we all need information to kind of decide, you know, what are we going to do? What do we want to do? And, you know, picking up something doesn't necessarily require a lot of effort, but it does need information. So I think that's what we need is really, you know, ways to get that access to information as much as meeting one-to-one, especially now with all the technology and everything.
That we are so busy with our lives that the cochlear implant has become something like we call the tool, something normal. If people ask me, who are you? I tell them, I am a husband. I am a father. I'm a grandfather. I was a teacher. I'm an artist. I like to cook. I like good wine. Where I'm now near the bottom. I happen to be deaf. I happen to have a cochlear implant.
I happen
But
to
it
be
is
deaf.
not the big thing in my life. Well, these other things are more important to me. And I think many of the here feel the same way. We're busy life. We have so many things to do. Our CI has become part of us. Do we need a special group? That's a hard question to answer.
As a former cochlear implant user, I don't think it really would be necessary for me to join a support group or other group of people who have cochlear implants because I see people every day who have cochlear implants. So I wouldn't need to join a special group for that. I wouldn't need to make a special effort to support one another or share experiences with others because I see people in my everyday experience, in my everyday environment, who have cochlear implants. And so, you know, I see those people running meetings. After a meeting, I can interact with those people and ask those questions that I might ask to a support group. As was mentioned by other panelists, we all have busy lives, and so that would be another thing to fit into our schedule. So I think in our world, we do have the resources in our own environment that we can ask to individuals.
As you've heard, very different experiences, so finding people similar to yourself is really powerful. But through the internet and other tools, you can reach out. My closest colleagues are in Texas and in Ohio, in Michigan. I'm in Oregon, but we have a lot in common, so they become kind of our core group, even though we don't get together physically. But the other thing that I thought of with your question is that increasingly, I think the larger groups that like NAD and HLAA that have power on a national and international basis. Being part of those groups really influences the overall landscape. So big groups that are useful for all our different life stories and modes of communicating, and help support each other, not work against each other, is really important.
I would like to ask the panelists about their experiences with their hearing aids. The hearing aids that they have nowadays that are available to us, we can go to an audiology appointment and have them mapped. It's very similar to a cochlear implant where you have to go to an audiologist for mapping. And I'm interested about the equalness of those two types of hearing aids and the cochlear implants. What is your experience? Are they similar or not?
I can speak from my own experience. I grew up using hearing aids, and I've been implanted on my left side. Oh, excuse me. And I've used my hearing aids mostly on my left side, and they were effective for me until I was 17. But for some reason, I lost all of my residual hearing, and the hearing aids were not of any value. I did go through a couple of surgeries to patch up a hole in my cochlea. The doctor found a hole. They patched up the hole. I could hear again. But a few months later, again, my hearing was gone. A second surgery was done, and it was unsuccessful. So at that point, I considered a cochlear implant, listed out the pros and cons for myself, and decided to go ahead and pursue the cochlear implantation. When I first had the cochlear implant, it really was quite a new experience. There were sounds that I heard with the cochlear implant that I was never able to hear with the hearing aids. I had lower expectations for the cochlear implant. I thought I would hear less than with my hearing aids, but my reality was I heard more sounds and newer sounds than with the hearing aids. So from my experience, hearing aids and the cochlear implant are not a similar experience. I hear more with the cochlear implant. Some of the panelists have mentioned hearing new things like brushing your hair, turning pages. I don't necessarily hear those same sounds, but I'm very happy that I've gotten an implant, and it's been very successful for me from the beginning.
I had very powerful hearing aids, and they mostly amplified high frequencies, low frequencies, not as much. So in that context, for me, the cochlear implant, much less tiring. Hearing aids at the end of the day after work, I couldn't wait to take them out, and I can't tell you why, but just exhausting. Didn't really like having stuff in my ears, the ear mode. So the cochlear implant has been more comfortable for me, in part because the sound is across the board. It's not oriented towards high frequencies.
I wore a hearing aid from the time I was 5 years old until the time I was 52 years old. When I was 5 years old, I had a moderate hearing loss, and my hearing aid allowed me to be very included in classroom, regular public school classroom. As my hearing got worse, I can tell you that I had excellent hearing aids, even as my hearing deteriorated. When I was working at NTID, I was fortunate to have a wonderful audiology department that Larry Scott headed. And I had the most powerful hearing aids that I could possibly have. I never benefited from digital hearing aids, so I really can't speak to those. I didn't like them. I stayed with analog hearing aids. Now, the last 10 years of wearing a hearing aid, I would describe it as sound going into my ear and being like a blinking wire, electric, like a light that's going off and on. It was off and on, taking its time getting into my head. As soon as I had my first mapping, the sound was in my brain. And that was the first reaction I feel like I had. It was right there in my brain. And I went from not being able to hear my husband in the dark or even be able to follow his sign language, tactile sign language, because my husband's hand is twice as big as my hand. Joseph Avery back there has got big hands. So on the drive home from my first mapping appointment, when I was first hooked up, Joe started to talk to me in the car. It was 5:30 on a late November night, and I heard everything he said to me. So to me, by the time my hearing had deteriorated at the age of 52, there was no comparison between a hearing aid and a cochlear implant, none whatsoever.
One issue to consider in terms of cochlear implants is if you are a frequent medical patient who needs to have scanning technology like MRIs, that can be an issue. And that's the case with me. I can't go through a regular MRI, although I understand that there are now newer MRI machines that have lower levels of magnetic imaging, so I might be able to do that now. But when I got my implant, couldn't do that. That's important if you are a frequent medical patient. The only other negative I can think of is I still want to skydive, and you're not supposed to be able to do that with a cochlear implant on. If I ever win the lottery or get filthy rich, I would consider having my magnet removed temporarily just so I could go skydiving. However, until then, I'll just have to live with it. But the medical issue, I think, is important to bring up.
I just wanted to thank you for coming and sharing all your personal experiences, being so honest and open and divulging really the diversity of the experiences that you've each had. I'm curious if you met each other before today. Did you each, write individual, your own chapters? And if you hadn't met before, what have you gained from this experience being together? Thank you.
I knew Sally, she's my accountant, for my grant. I knew Patty well, long time. I knew David a little bit. That's it. I knew Jerry. Yeah, I knew Jerry. So I know Jerry a long time. But I think it's kind of the same. Oh, I knew Kelly. Kelly was a student of mine. So I probably knew as many. Jerry, how many did you know? You know them all before?
I knew them electronically. I think I had met all of them and interacted. Many of them happened to have contact 9, 10 years ago. And the Campions I met through Mark, when I asked him to help us identify parents. Heidi I met through MSSD.
If you want to know what it's like to be a deaf person who has a cochlear implant, what it means for that person, I highly recommend the book. So thank you.